Hi, I'm Martin Shearer at Tesseract Studios, and tonight we're going to be talking about some of the projects I've done in the past. A lot of these were done before there was an internet, and I have all these projects that have been sitting in boxes and you don't know about them. And I think they're interesting enough that you might enjoy hearing about them. So we're going to start with the first one tonight, and that is going to be the thing I call the Tetrahedron Ring. It's an interesting piece of sculpture, a series of sculptures. And I want to preface this section about there's going to be several in a series of these, and they're all basically on the same premise that I believe that one of the takes I have with my sculpture is I think it should be something you can play with. Usually if you go into a gallery or a museum or something, you're forbidden to touch the sculptures. And in fact, they have a security guard who will smack your wrist if you get too close to any of the sculptures, which is a good idea because that kind of stuff is not made to be touched or handled. You're going to mess it up if you do, if a lot of people do it. But I think that sculpture could be something that you actually play with. Not a toy per se, but more of a variable piece of sculpture, so that something that it's not static. Most sculpture sits there on a plinth or a shelf and it just looks the same every time you look at it. But what if you had a piece of sculpture that was different every time you looked at it? Or if you got tired of looking at it, you could change the way it looks. It's the same piece, you just rearrange it. And so that's the philosophy I started with when I started these series. Now, the first one is the Tetrahedron Ring. So you're probably wondering, what the heck is a tetrahedron? Well, on the table here, I have one. This is a tetrahedron. It is a four-sided figure. Each side is an equilateral triangle, so it has four sides. It's the strongest solid shape like this because it's all made out of triangles. It's a very, very strong structure. Now this one's cardboard. It's hollow, but this is what a tetrahedron is. Now, I started with this project because I came across an origami version of this thing I'm about to show you, and I've hinged it in a way so that I can construct one of these tetrahedron rings. And here we have a pair of tetrahedrons that is hinged on one of its sides. Okay? Now, if you took three of these and hooked them together, another one would hinge here, you get something that looks like this. There's a pair of tetrahedrons, here's a pair of tetrahedrons, and they're arranged in a circle, and now this thing can rotate. Which is, one wouldn't think that this would function this way because you have right angle hinges at right angles to each other. But if you arrange them in a circle, it actually forms a ring that can rotate. Now this is a paper, folded paper. This is from an origami book, and I thought this was a pretty cool thing, and so I wanted to make them solid and do different variations of this. But I decorated this so that I could show you an interesting feature of this. And if you look at the center of this sculpture, as I rotate it, just pay attention to the center figure. As it goes around, you'll see it changes. And that'll repeat after three. Okay? But if I just simply turn it over, you have a different set of designs in the center. So it's almost like a three-dimensional kaleidoscope in a way, which I thought was curious and interesting. And so This was the first one I made. Okay. I made a nicer one out of gold paper. It's the same deal. It just rotates. It's very tactile, and it's almost like a fidget spinner in that you can't help but play with this thing. It's sort of like an executive desk toy that's a piece of sculpture. Now, if we take this tetrahedron ring and we take the skeleton of it, in other words, if we took the center line of each one of these and hooked them together so that instead of being a solid or a hollow object, it ends up being more like this. It's the exact same thing, only I have an equilateral triangle here and an equilateral triangle here. They are notched and faced together, and the hinges are in the same places. And now it's the same thing, only slightly different looking. This is a simple version. I didn't decorate it so you could see how it looks, which I thought was a really interesting thing. Now this could be a piece of sculpture, you know, and you could arrange it different ways and set it on your desk or your shelf or whatever. And it's slightly different every time you look at it. Now, if you took, here's a metal version of what I just showed you. This is made out of aluminum with steel hinges. This is a work in progress. It's a prototype, so it's not real pretty, but it's very large and it rotates. It's a little sticky, but it's functional. Very interesting, functional, and it does nothing. It's like a fidget spinner, fidget toy. Okay, now, since if we took this shape and cut it in half, so in other words, if we just cut out the center part, remove it, you would end up with something that looks like this. It's only half of that, but it still functions the same way. And it's very tactile. So, and again, it's a piece of sculpture that can sit in many, many different ways, and it's different every time you look at it. Okay. And working from that same premise, I took these hinges from the hardware store and hooked them together in the same way. They're notched and fitted together, and it functions the same way, only it's not an equilateral triangle. And here's one with a smaller hinge. So that's the tetrahedron ring. Thanks for watching.